May 28, 1987, noon in Moscow. The air is still, veiled by a gray haze that softens the golden domes of the Kremlin and the towers of the Red Wall. Over the city drifts the usual sound of traffic, the distant murmur of trams and the peal of the noon bells. No one looks up. At more than 1,000 meters high, a Cessna 172 Skyhawk, white with red and blue stripes, moves in a straight line above the rooftops. It is a small plane, almost a speck in the sky, but the western sector's radars have been tracking it for several minutes. In the control tower at Sheremetyevo, an operator watches the screen with a frown. We have a return with no transponder coming in from the northwest. Identification? None. Possible civil aircraft en route. The supervisor nods, tired. There's no alarm. In a country where the sky belongs to the state, an intruder should be impossible. He must have lost his bearings, one of the officers says. No one imagines what is really happening. The plane continues its approach. It passes over Moscow's outer ring road, follows the course of the Moskva River, and descends slowly. Pedestrians raise their eyes when they hear the monotonous engine of the little plane. Some think it is a military craft on exercise, others a film shoot. No one steps out of the way. At 6:55 p.m., the Cessna draws a turn over Red Square. Tourists stare, astonished, as the plane's shadow crosses the facade of St. Basil's. The pilot looks for an open space, but the place is full of pedestrians and vehicles. He makes a second circuit, follows the river, and sees a clear stretch of asphalt, the Bolshoi Moskvoretsky Bridge in front of the Kremlin. He reduces speed. The engine shudders, the noise mingles with the wind and the hum of cars. The tires touch the asphalt and bounce once before settling fully. The little plane rolls a few meters and stops between two rows of cars that brake hard. Drivers climb out, incredulous. Some run toward the craft, others simply stare. The side door opens. From the cockpit descends a thin young man in a blue flight jacket, his face covered in dust. He is 19 years old. He walks slowly across the bridge, raises a hand in greeting, and smiles. His name is Mathias Rust, a citizen of West Germany. In a matter of seconds, the political heart of the Soviet Empire falls silent. The Kremlin's guards watch from the towers, unsure whether what they see is a provocation or a joke. Muscovites draw near, applaud, ask questions. Rust answers calmly, "I come in peace." A few meters away, traffic officers try to hold back the crowd as reports begin reaching KGB offices. On the radar screens, the dot disappears over central Moscow. No one knows what to say. A civilian plane, without authorization, without weapons, and without support, has just crossed more than 800 kilometers of Soviet airspace and landed beside the Kremlin. The Soviet Union, the most closely watched power on the planet, has just been traversed from end to end by a boy in a little plane. In 1987, the world seemed to be in a silent truce. After 4 decades of threat speeches and proxy wars, the Cold War was cooling, but no less dangerous. The superpowers remained opposed, each convinced that the smallest mistake could change the course of history. In Washington, Ronald Reagan sought to close his presidency with a historic gesture. He had gone from calling the Soviet Union the evil empire to shaking Mikhail Gorbachev's hand. Together, they were negotiating the INF Treaty, meant to eliminate intermediate-range nuclear missiles deployed in Europe. It was real progress, but also a fragile negotiation. Every step toward détente had to survive the skepticism of the military, the bureaucrats, and the intelligence services who still saw in the other side an existential threat. In Moscow, Gorbachev was attempting something more ambitious than a treaty. His policy of perestroika, economic reconstruction, and glasnost, informational openness, had begun to transform Soviet life. For the first time in generations, citizens could criticize their leaders, publish their complaints, talk politics without looking over their shoulders. But that opening also awakened old ghosts. Within the Communist Party, the fracture was evident. Reformers wanted a modern country. Conservatives saw betrayal. While the Kremlin wavered between change and orthodoxy, the structure that had sustained the Soviet Union for decades remained intact: the military apparatus. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers, air bases across 11 time zones, radars in the Urals, supersonic interceptors on constant alert, and a network of anti-aircraft missiles covering the country like an invisible shield. To the Soviets, their defense was the most complete in the world. To the West, it was a fortress. Yet beneath that appearance of order, confidence was cracking. The surveillance systems accumulated failures, the radars aged, the protocols grew slower and more contradictory. The senior command knew it, but kept silent. In the Soviet Union, admitting a mistake was worse than making one. Abroad, the country's image was softening. Photographs of Gorbachev and Reagan smiling in Reykjavik or Geneva seemed to herald the end of the age of distrust. Western propaganda portrayed the USSR not as an enemy, but as a tired giant trying to adapt. But within its borders, fear still ruled everything. Fear of espionage, sabotage, infiltration. Paranoia was a reflex. In the skies, especially, vigilance was absolute. The Soviet air defense system was a lattice of radars, S-75 Dvina, S-125 Neva, S-200 Vega batteries, and MiG and Sukhoi interceptors on permanent alert. In theory, no aircraft could enter the airspace without being detected. Instructors taught new pilots that the Soviet sky was sealed like steel. The manual said no enemy plane could fly more than 5 minutes without being shot down. In Moscow's cafes, the people no longer feared a nuclear war, but they did believe in the infallibility of their defenses. Soviet power rested not only on missiles, but on the myth of its impenetrability. It was their pride and psychological support. And yet, on May 28, 1987, that certainty would break with the quiet sound of a civil aircraft engine. Neither the most sophisticated radar nor the fastest missiles would see coming the threat that crossed the country that day. Because it was not a spy or a soldier. It was a 19-year-old who believed in peace more than in fear. No one, neither in Washington nor in Moscow, could imagine that within hours, a simple Cessna 172 would cross the Soviet Union from end to end, slip past all its defenses, and land beside the Kremlin before the eyes of the world. Mathias Rust was born in Hamburg in 1968, in a Germany still divided by a wall. The son of a middle-class family, he grew up in a modern, prosperous country marked by the shadow of the past. Since childhood, he had been fascinated by airplanes. He spent hours watching the sky, tracing with his finger the paths of the jets crossing over the Elbe. He dreamed of piloting one of them, of flying beyond the borders that the adult world seemed to impose. At 15, he joined a flying club and soon showed a natural talent. He had good coordination, patience, and an unusual calm for his age. In 1985, he obtained his private pilot's license. To his instructors, he was methodical, disciplined, somewhat quiet. To his friends, a reserved, idealistic boy who believed gestures could change history. But beneath that calm was a restlessness. Germany remained the central point of the East-West confrontation. In Hamburg, NATO planes crisscrossed the sky every day. To the east, Soviet MiGs answered with low flights over Poland. Rust grew up hearing that the world could end with a miscalculation. To his adolescent mind, that logic seemed absurd. Two enemy blocks watching each other without speaking, two people separated by an invisible wall. In late 1986, he began to obsess over an idea. It was neither a political project nor a sporting feat, but a symbolic act: to cross the Iron Curtain in a little plane and land in Moscow as an ambassador of peace. He wrote in his diary, "If I can fly without fear, perhaps others can trust." Rust began to plan with an engineer's precision. He bought maps of Eastern Europe, studied Soviet air routes, and calculated distances with a navigation ruler. He practiced long flights from Hamburg to Scotland and Finland to accustom himself to hours of solitude. He learned to navigate by compass, by the sun, by the color of the terrain. He had no GPS, no co-pilot, no technical support. Only a determination that grew by the day. He told his family he was planning a training trip through Northern Europe. No one imagined his true intentions. At the Aero Club, he was considered a harmless enthusiast. The mechanics watched him obsessively check every part of the Cessna 172 Skyhawk, registration DECJB, which he had rented. He added auxiliary fuel tanks, adjusted the compass, calibrated the altimeter again and again. Rust was not reckless. He knew that entering Soviet airspace without permission was a crime, but he also believed that a gesture of trust could outweigh a border. He was naive, yes, but his naivete had the force of conviction. In his mind, there would be no weapons, no flags, no provocation, only a white plane with a red stripe and a message. Peace does not need permission. That idea became his personal mission. He sought neither fame nor glory. He sought meaning. And in the spring of 1987, while Europe breathed with difficulty between fear and hope, Mathias Rust decided that he, a young man without rank or power, would make the leap that governments did not dare to make. His plan was neither military nor political. It was symbolic, to prove that trust can fly too. His naivete would be his shield, and his faith, his fuel. Spring of 1987. At a small airfield north of Hamburg, the hangars open at dawn. Among the mechanics preparing training planes, a blonde-haired young man checks once again his craft. It is a Cessna 172 Skyhawk, registration DECJB, white with a red stripe. It looks harmless, almost domestic, but Rust regards it with the devotion others give an amulet. He knows it will be his only companion on a journey no one else understands. On his official flight plan, filed with the club, there is a routine route: Hamburg, Reykjavik, Faroe Islands, Helsinki. It is the itinerary of a student accumulating hours. But what Rust does not write on that paper is his true destination. His map, folded in his pocket, has a hand-drawn line, one that crosses the Gulf of Finland and plunges directly into Soviet territory. For weeks, he has worked in silence. He has modified the plane with his own hands, additional fuel tanks installed on the back seats, redundant compasses taped to the panel, a portable emergency radio, and a small first aid kit. He carries no weapons, no escort, no authorization, not even a co-pilot. Only a map, a compass, and a purpose that pushes him beyond logic. Rust is methodical. He rehearses every step of the trip in his mind. He calculates fuel consumption, the margin of error in his instruments, the minimum altitude to avoid radar. He knows that if he gets lost, there will be no rescue. He also knows that if he is intercepted, he could be shot down. And yet, there is no trace of fear in his notes. In his diary, he writes a phrase that will echo during the interrogations to come. If I can fly without fear, others will be able to trust. On May 13th, he takes off from Hamburg heading north. He crosses the North Sea, flies over the coasts of Scotland, reaches Norway, and continues to Reykjavik, Iceland. It all looks like a training excursion. Controllers log him as a civil flight without irregularities. To the world's eyes, Mathias Rust is just another young pilot enjoying his license. But in his mind, the plan is taking shape. He does not seek to flee or to defy, but to demonstrate. At a time when the sky was an invisible battlefield, his intent is simple: to cross it as if it were free. In the following days, Rust remains in Finland, fine-tuning his final plan. He buys fuel, checks the engine, cleans the propellers with almost religious precision. He studies Soviet navigation charts, watches the wind direction, and calculates daylight hours. The flight must be made when the sun is high and shadows are short to reduce visibility from the ground. On May 28th, at 12:21 p.m., he will take off from Helsinki-Malmi Airport with a declared destination of Stockholm. But as soon as he crosses the Finnish coast, he will turn off the transponder, swing the rudder east, and head into the unknown. No one at the airfield will suspect a thing. No one will imagine that the calm-eyed boy is about to expose the most sacred myth of Soviet power. That day, the Baltic sky will be his border and his test. The invisible line dividing two worlds will become, for a few hours, his only runway. And so, with a map, a compass, and a conviction, Mathias Rust sets in motion the most improbable plan of the Cold War: to fly alone to the enemy's heart with the naive hope that peace can land without permission. The morning of May 28, 1987, dawned clear over Helsinki. The air was cold, but the sky was clean, ideal for flying. At Malmö Airport, Mathias Rust checked his plane one last time. The engine, the propellers, the navigation instruments. Everything was in order. He had slept little, almost not at all. The night before, he had reviewed his plan over and over until the map's lines were etched in his mind like a reflex. His official flight plan declared a route to Stockholm, a short, routine hop across the Baltic Sea. The controllers greeted him politely. No one suspected anything. At 12:21 p.m., Rust lifted off smoothly and climbed north. From the cockpit, he watched Finland's coastline grow smaller, the cities dissolve into forest, and the blue horizon of the Gulf of Finland opened before him like a promise. For the first 20 minutes, he kept his exact heading and recorded altitude. Then, when the tower asked him to confirm position, Rust replied calmly, "DECJB, en route to Stockholm, all normal." Shortly after, he slowly turned the rudder eastward and descended. He switched off the transponder, the device that sends an identification signal to civil radars. In that instant, he disappeared. To the outside world, the Cessna 172 ceased to exist. Finnish controllers tried to reach him, repeated calls, adjusted frequencies. No response. In the official record, the aircraft was marked as a possible accident over the Baltic Sea. A search operation was organized. Patrol boats left Helsinki and Tallinn. For hours, they scanned the Gulf's gray surface, hoping to find debris, a fuel slick, a floating wing. They found nothing. Rust, meanwhile, flew beneath the clouds, invisible, following the sun's reflection on the water. At 2:10 p.m., he crossed the imaginary line separating Finland from the Soviet Union. No one intercepted him, no warnings, no shots. Only a solitary plane, piloted by a 19-year-old, entering the most restricted airspace on the planet. Below his altitude, Estonia's forests stretched to the horizon. Rust held to barely 600 meters, low enough to evade radar, yet high enough not to be mistaken for a crop duster. Each minute forward defied military logic. If discovered, he would likely have no time even to realize he had been shot down. On the Tallinn sector's radars, an operator noticed a faint signal, a weak echo appearing and disappearing amid interference. He called his superior. It could be a civil plane, comrade. Authorized flight? Negative, but perhaps a Finnish fisherman. A calibration error. The superior nodded, indifferent. The echo vanished. Rust continued east, following the Narva River. Beneath him, towns moved through an ordinary day. Farmers in fields, cars on roads, children playing by lakes. No one looked up. No one imagined that a lone foreigner was crossing, above their heads, the airspace of the Soviet Empire. The panel clock read 2:30 p.m. The Gulf of Finland lay behind, and before him the sky opened toward the immensity of Russia. The plan had passed from paper into history. At that moment, while Finnish rescue teams searched for the remains of a plane that had never crashed, Mathias Rust kept flying toward Moscow. In his notebook, he wrote with a trembling hand, "There is no turning back." At the Tallinn Air Defense Headquarters, the afternoon dragged on without incident. Operators watched their green screens, full of echoes that appeared and faded like ghosts. At the radar's margins, a weak dot began to repeat, slowly crossing the coastline. Its speed was low, its path irregular. Nothing like a military aircraft. "Unidentified contact, northern quadrant," a technician said. His superior came closer, examined the screen. The echo moved slowly, too slowly. Speed? 120 knots, perhaps less. Then it's nothing. A lost civil aircraft or a fault. The dot kept moving inland. The operators logged it, but the routine of the job made them blind. They had seen dozens of similar signals caused by interference, storms, even migratory birds. The Soviet Union was so vast that its skies had filled with noise. At Pskov Command, several hundred kilometers to the east, another radar picked up the same echo. This time, the technician hesitated. "It could be a light aircraft," he said. "Authorized flight?" asked his officer. "Negative, Comrade Colonel." "Then send an interceptor." Minutes later, a MiG-23 took off from the nearest base. Its pilot, Lieutenant Gennady Osipovich, was ordered to locate the intruder and establish visual contact. He climbed at full speed, reached the point calculated by radar. But when he arrived, he saw nothing, only low, broken clouds and a layer of haze over the Pskov forests. "No target in sight," he reported by radio. "Repeat search." "Negative, no contact." Rust, meanwhile, flew at barely 600 meters between cloud layers, using roads and rivers for orientation. At that altitude, ground radar would detect and lose him in intervals, unable to fix a stable track. His steady speed and small size made him look like a local aircraft or a training flight. In Moscow, the air defense system counted thousands of craft assigned to different sectors: agricultural planes, regional transports, domestic flights, all logged with similar numbers. Rust's Echo was interpreted as one of those flights. The code was entered in the database with a simple note: local flight, no priority. The Soviet Shield, designed to detect strategic bombers, intercontinental missiles, and swarms of enemy fighters, was blind to a touring plane drifting like a white shadow over the landscape. The radars, calibrated for large-scale threats, ignored small echoes. The algorithms classified them as irrelevant. At some point, a Leningrad operator reported the anomaly to his commander. "Commander, the same contact is heading southeast. Speed? Constant, no change." "Then leave it, it's not military." "What if it's a spy plane?" The commander smiled wearily. "A spy plane doing 120 knots? No, comrade, the Americans aren't that foolish." The Echo disappeared from the screen soon after. No one mentioned it again. Meanwhile, above the forests of northwest Russia, Mathias Rust held his course. Below him, the most complex machinery on the planet, thousands of radars, fighters, and missiles, searched for him and ignored him at the same time. The system designed to detect a nuclear attack could not see a little plane. The shield meant to protect the largest empire on Earth had just let in, unknowingly, a boy from Hamburg, armed only with a compass and an idea. The clock read 2:30 p.m. when Rust left Estonia's border behind and entered Russian sky. Before him stretched a green and gray immensity, an endless mosaic of forests, lakes, and cultivated fields. There was no horizon, only repetition of the landscape beyond sight. From above, the country the world feared looked calm, almost asleep. For the first hours, Rust kept low altitude, about 600 meters. He traveled between cloud layers that hid him from radars and shielded him from the sun. The engine droned steadily, monotonously, the most faithful sound he had in that ocean of air. The radio remained off. There was nothing to say. If someone called him, he could not answer. If someone saw him, he should not listen. It was a flight of absolute silence. Below, the world kept its rhythm. In northern villages, peasants paused and looked up. They saw a white plane with red stripes crossing slowly overhead, so low it looked like a lost gull. Some waved, thinking it a crop duster or a training craft. In towns, children ran to point at the bright speck. No one imagined that foreign shadow had crossed a forbidden border and that its pilot was heading, without permission, to Moscow. At 3:10 p.m., Rust passed over Leningrad, the city of sieges and resistance. From the cockpit, he saw the dark waters of the Neva and the golden spires of Saints Peter and Paul. For a moment, he thought of landing there at Pulkovo Airport to announce his peace mission. But instinct told him pressing on was safer. The true symbol had to be at the center of power, not its periphery. He corrected toward the southeast and continued. The sky was clear and the wind favorable. Rust relaxed for the first time since switching off the transponder. The tension of the initial crossing dissolved. He wrote on a loose sheet over the panel. The air's so calm that fear disappeared. At 4 p.m., he flew over endless forests and tiny villages where the houses looked like toys. On a highway, he saw the metallic glint of trucks and cars and followed them as if they were an invisible thread guiding him east. At each bend of the river, he corrected heading with a precision no radar could compute. He passed over a freight train moving the other way. For a few seconds, the engineer and the pilot looked at each other without knowing it. One saw a white dot in the sky, the other a gray line on the ground. Neither thought that chance crossing would be remembered in history. At 5:30 p.m., Rust had been flying more than 3 hours non-stop. The fuel was dropping, but still within plan. He glanced at his compass. The needle wavered slightly, but the heading was right. Moscow was less than 200 kilometers away. For a moment, the absurdity hit him. He was flying alone, unescorted, over the most closed country in the world, and no one had stopped him. No fighters, no alerts, no sirens, not even a voice on the radio. Only the constant murmur of the engine and the vastness of the Soviet sky. Mute, unreachable. He felt he was no longer fleeing or defying anyone. He was doing exactly what he had imagined, crossing fear as if it did not exist. The sun began to sink when the horizon took on a metallic gray. In the distance, among the clouds, a golden gleam appeared. It was the capital. After more than 4 hours of flight, Mathias Rust, the young man from Hamburg who dreamed of uniting two worlds, drew near Moscow. And the entire world, without knowing it, was about to witness one of the most unusual acts of the Cold War. At exactly 6 p.m., after more than 4 hours in the air, the horizon line changed color. In the glow of evening, Rust saw a golden shine, a shape recognizable even from afar, the Kremlin's domes. Moscow. For a few seconds, he did not believe what he was seeing. The enemy's capital, the Forbidden City, spread before him like a vast model, bathed in the setting sun. The solitude that had accompanied him throughout the flight turned to vertigo. In that instant, the immensity of the Soviet sky reduced to a simple question of decision: where to land. He descended slowly to 500 meters. At that height, the engine's noise mingled with the city's. Below, he saw avenues, trams, automobiles, parks, and crowds heading home. No one looked up. No one expected a foreign plane over Moscow. Rust turned toward Red Square, his original goal. From above, the space looked perfect, wide, straight, symbolic. But as he drew closer, he saw it was full of people. Tourists, pedestrians, children with balloons. Landing there would be a massacre. He circled again, heart pounding. He thought of an alternative strip, a park, a field, any level surface. Then, following the Moskva's course, he saw it. The Bolshoi-Moskvoretsky Bridge, a tongue of asphalt across the water right in front of the Kremlin, was nearly empty. Only a few cars were moving. Rust reduced speed, lowered the landing gear, and came down with the sun in his face. Wind buffeted the cockpit. He trimmed the pedals, lined up the sight, and waited for the exact moment. The tires kissed the asphalt with a dry squeal. The plane bounced once, dipped, and settled again. Cars braked sharply. Pedestrians stepped aside. The little aircraft rolled along the bridge, slowing until it stopped by the curb. The engine whined a second longer and then went still. Silence. For a few moments, no one moved. Then traffic stopped completely. People began to approach. Some applauded, others laughed. They thought it was an air show, an official Armed Forces Day celebration. No one imagined the plane had come from West Germany or that it had just crossed the most guarded country on the planet. Rust opened the side door, climbed down, and removed his headset. He was covered in dust and sweat, but his expression was calm. He looked around. The Kremlin was less than 200 meters away, its red wall reflecting the golden light. He walked a few steps, raised his hand in greeting, and, in a serene voice, told the onlookers around him, "I come in peace." The phrase was lost amid murmurs and camera clicks. Some invited him to pose. Others asked if he was part of a film. A man offered him a flower. Rust smiled, not fully understanding the language, but understanding the gesture. Minutes later, the police arrived. The officers gazed at the little plane in disbelief, unsure which protocol applied. The bridge in front of the Kremlin had become an improvised runway. The heart of Soviet power had been violated by a civilian aircraft. And while the world still ignored what had happened, a 19-year-old had just executed with surgical precision the most improbable landing of the 20th century. The news took less than an hour to circle the globe. At 7:30 p.m., international agencies began to transmit a headline that seemed impossible. A young German lands a small plane beside the Kremlin. In Western newsrooms, no one believed the story. Wires were checked, correspondents called, photos verified. But the images were real. A white Cessna 172 parked before the Kremlin's walls, surrounded by onlookers. In Europe, the news was received with amazement and humor. In West Berlin cafes, newspapers showed the smiling boy beside his airplane, like a modern adventurer. Some called him the peace pilot, others the Moscow madman. But in the Soviet capital, no one smiled. When the reports reached the Kremlin, Mikhail Gorbachev was informed personally. General staff officers, pale-faced, gave him the first details. A 19-year-old from West Germany had flown more than 800 kilometers over Soviet territory without interception. No radar had raised alarm, no fighter had managed to identify him. And now, the intruder was in custody, safe and sound, in front of the seat of Soviet power. Gorbachev listened in silence. He did not shout or pound the table. He simply said, "Find me an explanation." There was none. Within hours, the incident became a political earthquake. The Minister of Defense, Marshal Sergei Sokolov, and the Commander-in-Chief of Air Defense, Alexander Koldunov, were dismissed immediately. Their subordinates, dozens of officers, lost their posts. Investigations began at the Leningrad and Pskov air bases. Commanders were questioned with the same refrain: how could it happen? The answer was as simple as it was devastating. No one believed such a thing could occur. The systems had worked, the radars had seen the echo, pilots had been scrambled, but somewhere between routine and complacency, the sense of danger was lost. The bureaucratic apparatus built to react to total war proved useless against an individual act. To the Soviet old guard, it was an intolerable humiliation. The country that had defeated Hitler, conquered space, and held NATO at bay had been mocked by a teenager in a civilian plane. Internal papers described it as a blow to state discipline. The most conservative generals demanded exemplary punishment, court-martials, even purges. But to reformists, the event meant something else. It was visible proof of what they had warned for years. The system was rusty, slow, captive to its own arrogance. The radars had not failed, but the mentality had. The Soviet fortress had grown so rigid that it no longer distinguished real danger from apparent. The failure was not military, it was moral. The structure nourished by fear had fractured within. On the streets, the reaction was different. Some Muscovites, upon hearing the story, felt a strange mix of shame and admiration. A foreign boy had landed in the capital's heart and, instead of causing harm, had offered flowers and spoken of peace. Official propaganda did not know how to interpret it. A provocateur, a symbol, a mockery. Mathias Rust's flight did not just cross Soviet skies, it crossed the very idea of control. It showed that the wall upholding fear could be crossed not with weapons, but with audacity. And in the Kremlin, while offices filled with dismissals, Mikhail Gorbachev understood what many of his generals refused to see, that the Soviet Union's future would no longer depend on its strength, but on its ability to admit its own cracks. The arrest took place only minutes after the landing. On the Bolshoi-Moskvoretsky Bridge, the first police officers on scene did not know what to do. A foreigner, a plane, a crowd applauding. The scene looked like a prank. Rust was gently escorted to the patrol car. He did not resist, did not ask for help. He only looked around, as if still trying to convince himself he had done it. They took him first to a local station and, hours later, to KGB headquarters at Lubyanka. The building, a yellow mass of stone and iron, had been the epicenter of Soviet fear for decades. Thousands had entered its doors never to return. Rust, barely 19, crossed its threshold with his hands in his pockets and the composure of someone who does not grasp the magnitude of his own act. The first interrogation began that same night. The agents waited with closed faces, a bare table, cold lights. Name: Mathias Rust. Nationality: West German. Reason for your incursion into Soviet territory? I'm not a spy, he replied calmly. I wanted to bring two peoples together. Silence fell. The interrogators exchanged glances. To them, that answer made no sense. No agency, no Western intelligence plan would conceive of something so absurd. But the boy spoke without hesitation, without contradictions. He said he had come in a spirit of peace, that his goal was to bring East and West closer, that he believed a simple flight could demonstrate the possibility of trust between enemies. The KGB officers listened with a mixture of skepticism and bewilderment. At first, they treated him like a spy. They looked for codes, ciphers, contacts, instructions. They examined his plane piece by piece, analyzed his instruments, his maps, even his camera. They found nothing. No hidden devices, no messages, no marks. Only handwritten notes and an unsent letter speaking of peace and understanding. One interrogator, a gray-haired man, lost his patience. "Do you think this is a game?" he asked coldly. Rust looked at him without blinking. "No, I think it is an opportunity." The agent clenched his teeth. "And you achieved it," he said softly, "by ridiculing us before the world." In the following days, interrogations continued, sometimes soft, sometimes harsh. They wanted a conspiracy. They needed a reason to justify the system's failure. But Rust held firm. There was no conspiracy, no ciphered message, no allies. Only a young man convinced he could cross fear with a little plane. On the fourth day, the case was classified as a political provocation. It was the only category they could use to explain the inexplicable. The trial was held in September of 1987 behind closed doors. Rust heard the sentence standing without a translator. He was found guilty of border violation and illegal entry into Soviet airspace and sentenced to 4 years of hard labor. The sentence, however, was more symbolic than real. No one wanted to prolong the scandal. In August of 1988, after 14 months in custody, Mathias Rust was released as a gesture of goodwill within Gorbachev's reforms. When he left prison, he wore the same calm with which he had landed beside the Kremlin. A journalist asked if he regretted it. Rust smiled faintly. "No," he said, "I would do it again." The boy who had made the world's most powerful army look foolish returned to Germany as an ambiguous symbol, neither hero nor criminal. Only the man who proved that sometimes history can change with an act as simple as refusing to be afraid. Mathias Rust's flight was not merely an odd anecdote. It was a silent detonation inside the Soviet system. Within weeks, the incident became a political tool and a global metaphor. For Mikhail Gorbachev, it was the perfect opportunity to rid himself of a generation of generals obstructing his reforms. He had warned for months that the army was too big, too old, too resistant to change. Rust's landing gave him the justification he needed. In the following months, more than 150 officers of the Soviet Air Defense Forces were dismissed or forced to retire. Among them, 2 marshals of the Soviet Union, 12 generals, and dozens of regional commanders. The purge was methodical. No one inside the military apparatus could question it. The humiliation had been public, and someone had to pay. The Ministry of Defense tried to dress up the facts, citing technical failures and communication errors. But the truth was plain. The country's aerial fortress, pride of the Cold War, had been breached by a single touring aircraft. In barracks, soldiers spoke in low voices about the German boy's plane. In military academies, instructors avoided mentioning it. The incident had eroded not only trust in technology, but in the state's authority itself. For Gorbachev, the blow was doubly useful. He showed the world he was willing to impose. Accountability within his own army, unthinkable in earlier times, and at the same time weakened the most conservative sectors, those who saw his perestroika and glasnost as threats to Soviet order. The message was clear. The new future would have no room for the old guardians. Meanwhile, in the West, the story was read very differently. European and American media presented Mathias Rust as a symbol of change, an idealistic youth who had defied the logic of fear. In headlines, his image appeared beside phrases like "the flight of peace" or "the boy who crossed the invisible wall." Western diplomats grasped the deeper meaning. The Soviet Union was no longer the invulnerable fortress it had been. Not because its technology had failed, but because its internal structure had lost cohesion. A single individual act had laid bare the vulnerability of an entire empire. Inside the country, people lived the event with a mix of shame and bewilderment. To some, Rust was a foreign provocateur who had humiliated the motherland. To others, a naive visionary who made visible what everyone knew but no one said, that fear had ceased to be a shield. Gorbachev, for his part, avoided condemning him personally. In private meetings, he called the incident a necessary lesson. And he was right. Rust's flight marked the beginning of the end of an era. No blood was shed, no bombs were dropped, nothing was destroyed. Yet its impact was greater than that of many wars. Because that day, the world understood something new, that the Cold War would not end with a missile, but with a landing. A boy from Hamburg, armed with a compass, an improbable faith, and a civilian plane, had crossed the greatest ideological wall in history without firing a single shot. And with that gesture, he symbolically toppled the very idea of a fortress. Decades have passed. The world that Mathias Rust crossed no longer exists. The Soviet Union disintegrated, the Berlin Wall fell, and the maps that once divided the planet have been redrawn again and again. But the story of that solitary flight remains, suspended in memory like a photograph no one can forget. Rust lives quietly, far from the headlines that made him famous. He gives no interviews, attends no commemorations, claims no glory. He lives a discreet life in Germany, as if his passage through history had been an accident of fate. He never became a hero, or a martyr, or an official symbol. But his gesture left a deeper mark than any medal or monument. Because his flight did not change borders, it changed the perception of fear. For half a century, the Cold War had taught the world that security depended on control, on radars, weapons, and orders. Rust proved the opposite, that the strongest power can be disarmed by an act of naivete. A wall may seem indestructible until someone dares to fly over it. On May 28, 1987, the Soviet Union did not fall. But that day, its myth did. Fear, which for generations had sustained the balance of war, broke before a single flight, a single pilot, a single decision. The day a Cessna landed beside the Kremlin, the world grasped an unexpected truth, that the Cold War would end not by force, but by audacity. And thus, without firing a shot, a boy from Hamburg made the most closed system on the planet tremble. Not with a revolution, but with a landing. Not with power, but with courage. Because sometimes history does not change with an army, but with one person who dares to believe the skies are open.